moving over to Seventh-day Adventist was not an easy transition for me, but it was a difficult one, but it ultimately turned out to be very rewarding. Now, I did receive a few questions from folks about, in general, why the transition of all the religions. What made you choose Seventh-day Adventist, or what's so special about Seventh-day Adventist that of all the religions we have here, that it did not falter you to make the wrong choice. At the end of the day, when I look at it here, I don't necessarily have that, I don't necessarily put that choice on myself. See, God does give us a freedom of choice, right? He gives us that freedom to make whatever decisions we want to do, whether it's good or bad, whether it'll work in our favor or not. He's given this freedom to all his children. But when I look at my situation, I look at it more of, I don't think it was more like, I'll play tic-tac-toe to find out which religion I'll move over to, right? I mean, leaving Islam for me was like taking a piece of my identity, taking a piece of me out, right? Because all my years growing up, I've always been associated to being a Muslim. My name is an Islamic, came from the Quran. It's an Islamic name, and I use Tanya for the channel. I never disclosed my real name, but to say here is that it's Tanya is one of my nicknames that I use here, but my real name is not actually, it comes from that Islamic background. So my name, my identity, right, what I'm associated with, my values, my culture, everything was tied to Islam as I was growing up, right? I see my parents, I see that we fast 30 days every year, we celebrate 2 Eids, right? We're supposed to pray 5 times a day, we're supposed to read the Quran. So all these things I learned, right? And I mentioned in my previous videos that I went to, you have a Bible school, but we have the Quran school too, where I was learning how to read the Quran. But, and this is very common here, that for many children that don't know Arabic, and they learn Arabic, they're not necessarily understanding what does the Quran say, right? I never fully understood the Quran until I got the English translation. So even if you go to these Quran schools, you're never fully taught the word of Allah, right? You're never fully taught that. You never understand the history behind it. You don't understand what you're reading. This is so difficult to digest and difficult to understand, but literally I saw myself every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, where we would have our Quran teacher come over to our house and pretty much watch us read the Quran in the right enunciation, the right way of reading it, right? And I would never understand a thing about it. I asked this question, like, what is this? What am I reading? Because whatever I'm reading, I'm not retaining it. Because how can you retain something when you don't understand what you're reading, right? I'm just reading it for the sake of it, for the fact that my mom wanted me to learn how to read the Quran, right? You're supposed to memorize the Quran. But again, how do you memorize the Quran when you don't understand what it says? So I always look at, I still have friends that are Muslim, and till this day, if you ask them, what does this mean, what does this say, right, they're just gonna say something that Allah is merciful, Allah is compassionate, but there's nothing more to it. There's no depth in it, what you're reading. And so that overall, moving that transition over to reading the Bible, right, studying the Bible, obviously have the English version, right, and reading it, and I understand that there's so much depth in the Bible, right? There's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of connections, there's a lot of ways to interpret the Bible, but to interpret it the right way. But it was it's not something. It's something that should have been taught when I was younger, when I was in that Quran school, right? But I never understood how to actually read a holy scripture to what extent until I started reading the Bible. Even when I started reading the Bible, I understood, but I never again fully grasped it. Even till this day, at times, I still struggle with that. But I'm trying to fight that battle. I'm trying to, overcome that. I pray to God that He continues to give me that wisdom to overcome that and really continue to learn and understand the Bible, learn the depth. Because at times when we're reading any holy books, we are only reading it at a surface level, right? Or in my situation, you're reading the surface level, but you don't understand, right? But, from reading the Bible, I understand from the surface level, but to get a deeper understanding, to get the connections, to, make those connective dots, but also understand the messaging, understand the symbolism, it takes years to learn, right? So watching the sermons, and I did mention in my previous videos that if you haven't, Pastor Stephen Bohr is he's an amazing pastor, and he really takes the time to explain the symbolism, explains the verses, and also draws connections throughout the Bible, right? He gives one interpretation, but he always backs it up with the Bible. The Bible was written years and years ago, right? And it's something that we cannot take lightly. I mean, everything that we're looking at it from a prophetic chain event was already fulfilled in the Bible much before it even happened. How can you not say that it is not true, right? Did not see that in the Quran. Even after I, got the English translation, started reading it, I don't see that impact, that powerful proof that the Quran is the only one, right? I get that sense from the Bible. When I read the Bible, I see it because I see it with my own eyes, everything that's happened. The Bible was written years ago, but you see the prophetic chain evolving and happening in our eyes, in our history. Even history in schools don't even teach all this in depth, but the Bible does, right? So I look at it and I cannot take the Bible lightly. It is such a beautiful and such an important book for us. But you also have, if I'm sure many of our Seventh-day Adventists know her, Mrs. Ellen G. White, right? I know there's few people who are just going to the journey of Seventh-day Adventists, or maybe they're not Seventh-day Adventists, don't know her. She's a very powerful figure, in our history, and she doesn't come from a luxurious education background. She came from a very elementary school background, but the knowledge, right, the information, if you read her, The Great Controversy, Desire of Ages, right, all the books that she's written, you can see that, well, one, you're going to question, how does a elementary school, I think she was elementary school, how does someone with an elementary school education write with such depth and understanding? That's one. And two, right, when you see this and she backs it up with the Bible, how can you say that it is a blasphemy or what she's saying is not true? Everything she's saying is true, and it's backed up, and it makes total sense, right? This is someone that doesn't come from a high education, someone that doesn't come with a lot of experience, but you clearly know that God instilled her the wisdom, gave her the skill, the power she needed to write it out. This is our last opportunity as God's people to hear His word through her work and choose the right path. I'm concerned as we get closer to the end times that how many of our brothers and sisters will still be walking the wrong path, right? Because for me, even though I know that I'm in the right path, I still have a lot to learn. I still have a lot to make sure that I'm prepared for the end times. But I'm equipped with the basics. But then there's so many brothers and sisters out there that are not even equipped with basics, right? Or they know very little thing, or majority of us, like in this world, you have Christians, but then you have different denominations within Christianity, right? Then you have like the other big religions, right? Islam, Judaism, and then you have other religions too, right? So everyone is like dispersed everywhere, and it makes you wonder that how many of us are going to last at the end, right? And it's really not to create any fear or concern. I mean, this is something that I'll be honest that I'm hoping that in my lifetime the end times does happen, because I would love to see the second coming of our Jesus, right? Where we see that finally, like the final judgment made. But I'm also thinking, so that's the exciting part. But then the other side, where am I doing enough? Right? Am I being a better Christian every single day? Right? Am I doing more that God sees that I am doing my best? Um, it's it's something that I think about here, but I also again, I mentioned in my previous videos though that till date I haven't told my parents, but I know that time is gonna come where I am gonna tell them, right? But I'm leaving it in the hands of God, that He tells me when I should be doing it, because that's going to be my opportunity where hopefully I can convince my parents that move to the right side, But I will leave that to the time. I will only put in prayer when that time comes up, right? One way or the other.